Are you an Amazon Prime member? Do you have 5 minutes? Then you could support us with $5 a month for free. Head to escapeartists.net/Twitch for a complete walkthrough.
Escape Pod. Episode 977. Reflected in Mirrored Skies. By Deborah L. Daft. Part 2 of 2.
Hi there, welcome to Escape Pod, the very first science fiction podcast magazine. I'm Mer Lafferty, your co-editor and host, bringing you part 2 of Reflected in Mirrored Skies by Deborah L. Davitt. Deborah was raised in Nevada but currently lives in Houston, Texas, with her husband and son. Her award-winning poetry and prose has appeared in over 70 journals, including Fantasy and Science Fiction, Asimov's, Analog, and Lightspeed. For more about her and her work, you can look at DeborahLDavitt.com. That's Davitt with 2 T's. It's narrated for us by Iba Armancas. Iba is an Emmy-nominated writer, director, and producer currently working in Los Angeles. A voracious reader who began narrating fiction podcasts nearly a decade ago, he is now one of 3 narrators on Interspace Outer Thoughts, Caltech NASA JPL's first science fiction anthology. The story was originally published in Compelling Science Fiction in 2018. Last week, we had shuttle pilot Mariana and her second, Alua, coming off an 18-month supply trip from Earth to the fledgling outpost above the clouds of Venus. Mariana was looking forward to seeing the captain of the outpost, and Alua was just looking forward to seeing someone with a different face than Mariana's. Unfortunately, their time at the Venus outpost goes quickly from relaxing to tragic when Mariana hears that Alua has been murdered. She doubts it's a crime of passion when the captain hints at some unrest. Go ahead and get something slightly decadent to drink, because you deserve it, and because it's story time.
Reflected in Mirrored Skies by Deborah L. Daft. Read by Iba Armancas. Mariana stood in the security room, listening to Tazar and Bitna Park Lee speak to the head of security. Ephraim Novak was a tall man, with a surprisingly weathered face.
You're saying that all the video and logs from the entire station were deleted between 1700 and 1900? Down to who opened which doors?
Tazar said incredulously.
Whoever did it clearly didn't want their routine discernible through omission, and probably easier to just do a full sweep of the files. Novak replied, shaking his head.
Are the files recoverable?
Bitna asked, in her precise manner. Surely you have ways of reconstituting lost data? Novak shook his head. They knew what they were doing. The data's gone. Which implies that it would be a member of your staff, given that whoever did this also got into your secure system. Tazar bit off the ends of his words. Novak's brows beetled. I trust my people, Captain. Mariana wanted to snap. Well, someone did this. Instead, she put in quietly, then we'll do this the old-fashioned way. Verify the whereabouts of everyone on board through interviews. Start with the video of when Alua and I came on board and see where he went, up to the missing portion of the record. Gives us a start, anyway.
Novak's eyes glittered in the low light. I'm sure that one of the command staff needs to be involved in the questioning.
Tazar frowned. I'll do it. Bitna raised her hands.
Delegation, she reminded him, is both a privilege and a perquisite. Let me handle this.
Tazar's eyes narrowed. Suddenly, she's quite cooperative, Mariana thought. If you wouldn't mind, she put in. I'd like to sit in on the interrogations. I wouldn't interfere, she added, looking at Novak. I'd just observe, and keep an eye on them both. Novak blinked, a faint smile wreathing his face. Certainly, Captain Dulahaye. But I'd like to start with my people, so we can get on with the actual investigating. Makes sense, Tazar acknowledged. Of course, we'll have to verify your whereabouts too, Novak, just to be sure. Novak snorted. I was giving Unseo Kwan a talking to over sanitation protocols. She'll vouch for it. For 2 hours? Bitna asked, mildly. No, that was the first 15 minutes. The rest was spent standing over her, making sure she used bleach and disinfectants and stored them properly in the chemical locker when done. You can't leave caustic crap sitting out. Bleach, something said in the back of Mariana's mind. The killer bleached Olua after they stripped him. She flinched, not wanting to think about it. The others left the room ahead of her, and Tassar squeezed her shoulder as she passed. Hey, he murmured quietly. This isn't really how I planned your first day here. She nodded, leaning into him for a moment. Me either, Mariana replied wearily. It's not all high drama here, right? I mean, I've spent enough time in flight between here and Earth to be tired of boredom, but this kind of excitement is a little much all at once. She tried to make it sound like a joke, but failed. Usually, the worst drama we have is when the number 3 balloon has sprung a leak and someone needs to go outside and patch it. He looked rueful. I can promise day after day of absolute boredom. It's a major selling point, I know. In the corridor, Mariana caught Novak and Bitna's thoughtful looks in her direction. No one was supposed to know that there was anything going on between us until we were sure of ourselves. But maybe I'm just paranoid. It's not like they caught me on the walk of shame back to guest quarters, right? Tassar sat at a table, regarding Unseo Kwan, while Dr. Bieri tapped at a tablet beside him. He'd handled enough disciplinary proceedings to know how to create psychological tension in someone's head. Intimidation didn't need to be about physical force. It could be about suggesting that you knew more than they wanted you to know. Having Dr. Bieri in the room suggested that there were files involved, that someone knew something, that the psychiatrist was here to be a witness, to attest that there was no duress used in this questioning, to take notes and maybe give him some advice. Power was force applied to a point, and at the moment, Unseo was the only point on which Tassar could focus anything. So he remained silent, because silence has power too. It created uncertainty in people's heads. He stared at Unseo until her shoulders shifted uncomfortably, and as he thought she might, Unseo broke the silence first. Captain, why am I here? Tassar didn't reply directly. He flicked a finger at the screen embedded in the conference table, bringing up clips from other interviews. First, a stevedore from the docking area. Juan Mendez. Yeah, I saw the pilot. Instant celebrity. You know how it goes. Then, a female environmental engineer with whom Unseo worked. Of course I saw him. Unseo made an ass of herself over him. Jealousy in the voice. Kept laughing like everything he said was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. I hope they used protection. There are at least 10 people on the list ahead of her to have kids. Sweat trickled from Unseo's hairline, and she licked her lips nervously. Tassar broke the silence. Whoever erased the security footage forgot that people have eyes. Memories. He glanced at Bieri. You want to tell us what happened next, Miss Kwan? How a night of passion ended with a young man dead in the airlock, his body scrubbed, though not of every important particle of evidence. This was true. Whoever had cleaned the body had gotten most of it, but there had been a few traces of Unseo's DNA. Unseo licked her lips again, remaining silent. Tassar shrugged. I can turn this over to the doctors. They'll do a physical evaluation. All evidence to add to the total. Captain, sir. Her eyes flicked to Bieri, who met her gaze with clinical dispassion. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. Tears streamed from her eyes. Ah, Tassar thought. Our first lie. The detective confronting the suspect, resulting in an immediate confession, was a fiction promulgated by bad vids. The breaking down process would take time, maybe more than he had. An accident, Tassar replied, nodding. He fell on a knife 12 times by accident. A sudden, ashen expression crossed Unseo's face. Dr. Bieri leaned in now, murmuring, I don't doubt that your regret is sincere, Miss Kwan. Her voice held soothing tones. But I think that you'll feel better if you tell us the truth. Perhaps you'll be able to work out some kind of reduced sentence with the captain. Unseo swallowed. I want a lawyer. We don't have lawyers here, Tassar pointed out. You'd need one versed in Admiralty law anyway. And, under maritime law, you are guilty until proven innocent. A flash of rage. You're a dictator. She's right about you. Uncio suddenly snapped her teeth shut, eyes widening as if she'd realized what she'd just slipped. You all signed contracts indicating that you accepted living here under maritime law, Tassar wanted to point out. You should probably read the fine print before just clicking I accept. But that sort of statement would diminish his authority, would lower him to arguing petty details, and right now he needed to assert his power, project it into Uncio's mind. Who's right? Dr. Barry asked, in her quiet, understated way. Talk to me, Uncio. Help me understand you. And Uncio turned towards that offer of hope like a flower towards the sun. She licked her lips and began to speak. In a sealed-off compartment, Bitna glared at Ephraim Novak. What were you and Uncio thinking? We aren't ready for the next phase. Public revelation of the moment was at least 2 years away on the timeline. Uncio moved too fast, Novak whispered. It didn't matter that he'd disabled the cameras near this compartment. A raised voice could still be heard in the corridor outside. Once she'd slept with him, she thought he was secure enough to talk into some preliminary smuggling. His lips twisted. He started to unravel. He'd have gone to his captain, and she'd have gone to Tassar and Mission Control. She panicked and stabbed him. He paused. I made her clean up the body, so that she'd understand her mistakes have consequences. I never authorized killing, Bitna snapped, her dark eyes suddenly fierce. Tell her that. Believe me, I will. She's made the situation worse, and by trying to hide the body, you have too. It could have been smoothed over as a date gone wrong. If he was dead already, all she would have to do is say he raped her. The dock's too sharp for that one to fly, and you know it. Novak grimaced, looking away. You wanted concealment, but all you've done is shine a spotlight on us. I did it for you, Novak insisted. If it comes down to it, we can run with the rape story, and I'll say I was trying to protect a frightened young woman. He reached out, hoping that she'd take his hand. She'd first taken him into her quarters 6 months ago, and over soju, she'd confided in him that she'd had troubling dreams, in which she heard the planet telling her that they shouldn't be here, at least not in the way that Earth intended them to be, that they needed to be here for the planet, to make themselves Venusian, as much as they could, rather than to make Venus into another Earth. It had sounded crazy at first, but the longer she'd spoken about casting off the rules of Earth, the old laws that constrained them, and establishing new ones that made sense for their new reality, the more it had all made sense to him. Novak had grown up in Montana. He had a rancher's instinctive distrust of government. He was head of security. He understood the need for law and order. But at the same time, he wanted those laws to be his laws, not the hodgepodge of rules that governed the Habitat fleet, each ship under the flag of a meaningless nation on a distant planet. And while he understood the chain of command, it grated on him that there was no way he could ever ascend. The captain was the captain. Novak could stay in his own job for decades, but he'd never get an ounce more say in decisions. And there was no way to change that. Any new captain would be one imposed on them by Mission Control back on Earth, would be a newcomer, a stranger, with no idea how things actually worked here. There were others in the fleet who felt the same way. Novak had monitored the fleet's message boards for security purposes long enough to have absorbed information about the factions on the 30 habitats floating above the lethal clouds. But he'd downplayed the autonomous to his captain in security briefings, mostly because he'd always sympathized with them, but also because they'd been disorganized and leaderless. Until Bitna came along. They'd become lovers. He knew that she had others. Uncio, probably that kid Jin Q, maybe Atanuke. It didn't bother him. A new world, new rules, and to hell with Earth. Now, Bitna frowned, but accepted his hand. She'll come around. She's got the level, pragmatic head of a quartermaster. No, she finally decided. I'll take responsibility, when we're ready. A pause. Since you've engineered a crisis point, perhaps it's time that the movement had its moment in the sun. Bitna pursed her lips. Still, we need a way to get off this station. Otherwise, Tassar will eventually corner us. And we can't overthrow him without a clear majority of the population voting for us, which takes it from a mutiny to democracy. He didn't like her continued suggestions of blame, but let it pass for the moment. If he starts a witch hunt looking for a murderer, we'll get the majority. Novak replied, nodding. It sounded good. But there's already a way off the station. For us and for the rest of our people. Her eyes narrowed. The supply ship. Plenty of room. Still has the supplies set for the other habitats. We make a run to the Chinese-flagged habitat. No extradition treaties currently. Novak felt a smile stretch his face. We just need a pilot. In a break between interrogations, Mariana slumped, mind churning. Who would kill Olua after a day on the station? Did he flirt with the wrong person? Did he see something he wasn't supposed to? Finally, Bitna and Novak joined her. I just got word from my team, Novak said, tapping his earpiece. They found several people with whom your co-pilot spoke before the missing logs started. I'm going to go talk to them. Want to come along? You don't want to bring them here for questioning? Mariana asked, raising her eyebrows. Novak shook his head. Don't want to spook them, he replied easily. Just a little one-on-one at first. Or 3-on-1, if you both come along. A friendly smile. Mariana nodded. I appreciate the chance to help. Bitna nodded, smiling. Where to? G-level, Section 4. Near the cargo bays. Mariana knew that much of the station layout. They smile so much without Desar around, don't they? He did a lot of talking with the stevedores and maintenance crew. Novak waved them out the hatch. Near the cargo bays, Mariana's wrist unit buzzed. She glanced down, noting a text coming in from Desar, but could only see the first few lines of the message. Novak involved. Security comp. She spun, just in time to watch Novak seize Bitna, wrap one thick arm around her neck, and press his gun to her forehead. Keep going, Novak grated. Your ship's just ahead. Move. Do what he says, Bitna gasped, as if her air supply had been cut off. Mariana's heart pounded. Bleach, she thought numbly. Talking to that girl about bleach. He just about waved it in our faces, didn't he? And now he's got the XO in a headlock, ready to kill her. Damn him. Something nagged at her. Some errant thought she couldn't focus on while adrenaline and stress cortisol hammered through her brain. A few feeble thoughts made their way through the storm. Should I scream? No, he'll shoot her and grab me. Shouldn't someone see this on the security cameras? And as she trudged onwards, feeling weak and old in the gravity to which her body remained unaccustomed, her mind circled around one numb thought. He killed Olua. He stabbed him. Tried to throw him out the airlock. He's the one. They reached the SRS, and crew members scrambled out of their way as Novak alternated keeping the pistol on Bitna and on anyone who approached. Then he rapped out, Open the doors and get in. We'll be behind you. Once inside, he pressed her towards the cockpit, ordered her to strap in, adding, You're going to have a different cargo this time. Mariana temporized. I can't lift off with the cargo bay doors closed. Desar will open them, Bitna said coolly, stepping away as Novak released her. She reached towards his belt and drew his backup pistol. We've got you, after all. I wondered why he seemed to be looking forward to this supply drop. She paused and then addressed Novak. I'll guard her. Open communications and give Desar our demands. She clicked the safety off and smiled faintly at Mariana. Mariana closed her eyes. That was the thought that had refused to coalesce. All their damn smiles. This ship hasn't refueled, she pointed out, giving herself time to think. Inhale. Exhale. More oxygen for the brain. Calm the body so the mind can follow. It has enough to get us to the next habitat, one without an extradition treaty. Bitna's voice held a smirk. Might as well make use of these hodgepodge laws. Show people how idiotic the system really is. Earth's laws governing another planet. Trying to make a new Earth here. This is Venus. We need our own laws for our own world. Practice saying that a lot? Mariana asked, trying to put irony in her voice. Get inside their heads. Guess if you say anything often enough, you'll make yourself believe it. I mean, it's not like you'll ever be independent of Earth. You still need supply drops just to get by. Shut up, Bitna ordered, her eyes narrowing. Behind them, Mariana could hear Novak talking with Desar by radio, making their demands. That you allow all those who do not wish to live under maritime law to leave with us, or hold immediate open elections, including a referendum on the laws that govern this colony. Pirates, Mariana thought, boiling. They're so quick to use the language of freedom to attain their own ends, but if they got their way, they'd turn the Kitesh into their own private dictatorship. I want to see her, Desar insisted. Novak turned the screen towards her so that its camera caught her face. "Say hello," he ordered. "Tell the captain he'd better give us what we want." Mariana considered her options. Assets, liabilities. She hadn't handled a gun since boot camp. No hand-to-hand training, and she'd spent the last 18 months in effectively zero-G conditions. Strength and confrontation were out as solutions. All she had was her mind, and her knowledge of her ship. 8 modular sections, back-to-back, like an old-fashioned train. Each of them could be shut down and separated from the rest in the event of a hull breach. This is my ship. You don't know it the way I do. That's my only advantage. And as her thoughts calmed and centered, Bitna jabbed her with the muzzle of the gun. "Speak up," the other woman ordered, peremptorily.
Mariana looked up at the camera. "Tassar," she said clearly, hoping that this wouldn't be the last time she spoke to him, that this wouldn't be the last image he had of her face.
"They're serious. Open the cargo bay doors. I'll take them where they need to go. Straight to hell, hopefully." She looked directly into his eyes, hoping he understood her message. "If any of their friends want to come along for the ride, I'll take them there too. People should know what happens when they fly the black, right? Me, I'm flying the red." As she'd hoped, Bitna only looked confused. She'd probably understand fly in space when Mariana meant under the pirate flag. Pirates had raised a black flag to signal intent to board a ship and take its cargo.
A red flag, however, meant no quarter. All aboard would be killed.
Tassar's expression tautened for a moment. Message received. Forcibly taking over someone else's ship? Piracy. Can't put them in a brig. Can't hold them prisoner on my ship for an 18-month trip back to Earth. Go to another habitat and I'm still a hostage. No, it's this. A bad chance. Barely a chance at all. But better than nothing.
They bound her hands with zip ties and fastened her legs to her pilot's seat as they waited for any of their followers willing to join them.
Mariana noted, with distant satisfaction, that only a handful of people seemed willing to stand as the public allies of hijackers. And when they both turned their backs briefly to welcome the newcomers on board, she took her chance, tapped a button on her control board that lit up an alarm button. As the station's cargo bay doors opened, Bitna pushed the muzzle of her gun against the back of Mariana's neck once again. "No mistakes," she warned the pilot. "Lady, if I make a mistake right now, I'll take out the cargo bay doors and risk the lives of 1,000 decent people." Mariana didn't have to fake the tremor in her bound hands as she tapped controls. "I'd be a lot better at this if you cut these off me." "No way," Novak snapped, as they eased out into the upper atmosphere. Mariana felt the buffet and the pressure of wind through the controls. "Not yet. Need to be further from the habitat, just in case things go south. 5 kilometers. 10. 15. She sucked in a breath and whispered, "Ooh, that's not good." Novak's head spun. "What?" "There's a problem in Bay 8. Mariana pointed at the flashing indicator. "Just started. Looks like one of your crew left a hatch unsealed when they finished unloading supplies. I can't close it from here." She shook her head. "Even at this altitude, the pressure's going to rip through each compartment." Their eyes widened. Panic set in. You scare someone enough, their front brain shuts down. Cortisol in their blood locks out rational thought, and they make bad decisions. They're already stressed, and I just poked the biggest fear button anyone on this planet has. Don't let them think. "Don't just stand there," Mariana snapped, with all the authority of a captain on her own ship.
"Someone needs to grab the spacesuits in the 3rd module and go close the damn door."
Novak spun and ran for the door. She expected that. He was a security chief, and his job remained putting himself between others and danger. Bitna wavered. "For God's sake!" Mariana yelped, again not having to fake the fear in her voice. "You've got me tied to a chair piloting a ship I can't even put on autopilot right now because you want a custom destination. What am I going to do besides pee myself up here? Help him, or we're all going to die. Some slow, some fast, take your pick." For an instant, she thought she'd pushed too hard. Bitna's eyes glittered in the lights of the control panel, and the gun wavered one last time. And then she turned and ran after Novak, sealing the cockpit door behind her. Mariana's head sagged. Then she forced herself to look up, to watch where they were on the cabin monitors. Saw them clamber into the pressure suits and then enter Module 8.
clearly expecting alien atmosphere, crushing pressure, a hatch in need of sealing, yet finding nothing. She touched another button on her console, the one marked Disengage. The rearmost module unlatched from the rest of her ship and plummeted into the clouds of sulfur dioxide below. She couldn't, thankfully, hear their screams, but she could see how their bodies flew up off the floor to hit the ceiling, saw the goods destined for another habitat tumbling around them, saw the walls start to press in around them as the pressure of the inner atmosphere closed in around them like a fist. They'll be dead before they hit the ground, she thought numbly. This was the only answer. It doesn't make it feel any less like murder. Mariana pressed several other controls, locking the cockpit off from the rest of the ship. And then she swung the ship back around on approach for the habitat, tapping at the radio controls with fingers starting to swell from the zip ties around her wrists. Kitesh, this is SRS 1468 returning to base. -1 module, -2 pirates. Do you want the remainder of their associates alive, or do I drop them on the surface too? Tassar's voice sagged with relief. SRS 1468. Mariana, it's good to hear your voice. We left the barn doors open for you. Come on home. We'll take care of your prisoners. And of you. Mariana wanted to close her eyes and weep, but she couldn't do that. Not yet. She still had a job to do. As she brought the ship in on manual, glanced out of one of the small windows of the cockpit, and saw her ship, and herself, tiny inside, reflected in one of the vast mirrors spun by the Kitesh, half in shadow, half in light, reflected there in Venus's skies, she hoped that she had, at last, truly come home.
And that was part 2 of Reflected in Mirrored Skies. One thing I love about this story is it covers the bitterness of the people in the middle. Now, I'm the kind of impatient person who can't fathom the fact that the Taj Mahal took 22 years to build, the James Webb Space Telescope took 30 years to build, Notre Dame took 103 years to build. But that's just nothing compared to our science fiction stories with people who keep generation ships going or begin terraforming actions on inhabitable planets. These are people who will never see the fruits of their labors, who will never step foot on a new planet. There is a certain tragedy to these people. The situation gives a very real reminder that they are just a replaceable cog in a much, much larger machine that doesn't really care if they live or die. But even if you acknowledge that the situation is a sad one, it usually is one that people aren't forced to take. And that still doesn't excuse murder and washing bodies in bleach and all that. Someone once described bureaucracy as a giant boat. Even if everyone on board wants to turn around, it's going to take some time to go safely in a new direction. You could probably cut corners, but then you get things like mutiny and murder, and decisions made to benefit a small group of people instead of the larger population. Another thing that stood out for me in this story was the fact that it gave us a sweet romance without showing us much romance at all. But it showed two people who work well together and trust each other and are relieved when that kidnapping thing turns out okay. There's no sex, no smooches, no declarations of love. But you know that these two are in it for the long haul now. I like that. Escape Pod is a production of Escape Artists Incorporated, distributed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Share it, don't change it, don't charge for it. All other rights are reserved by our authors. Thanks to those who supported us in our end of the year campaign. If you weren't able to in 2024, or even if you were and you still have a little bit sitting around, we welcome any support you can give us in the new year. There are always more stories to buy. And we've got some big plans for this year, it being our 20th anniversary and all. If you go to escapepod.org, you can see all of your options to support, including Patreon, PayPal, Ko-fi, and Twitch, all along the sidebar. They're all there for you, just waiting. We are also a 501c3 nonprofit, which means if you live in the U.S., then your donation might be tax deductible. Our music is by permission of Daikaiju. You can hear more from them at daikaiju.org. That was our show for this week, completing the story Reflected in Mirrored Skies. Our quote comes from Robert Zemeckis. "We don't function well as human beings when we're in isolation." We'll see you next week with more science fiction. Happy New Year. Stay safe. Stay kind.